So, David, I'm just started recording now. I'd like to introduce you as Dr. David Peat. You're now living on Vancouver Island, but you're originally working in Alberta. You've worked all over the world. I met you in Bahrain nearly 20 years ago, and you'd already come from the UAE then. If you could give us a brief overview of your background, and then you're going to get into talking about a project that you opened up in a school district in Alberta about over a decade ago, moving a traditional school system to a 21st century learning environment. Can I hand over to you now, please?
Sure, thanks, Lawrence. It's wonderful to reconnect with you again. A little bit of background about me. I guess I'm an educational psychologist and educator. Most of my work has been in teacher training, in teacher preparation, in guiding school systems, usually based on educational psychology, theory and practice and teaching. That's probably enough. If you want more information, if you want to go to drpeat.com, there's more than enough information there, or LinkedIn. It's always good to know who's talking to you, but that's enough about me.
That's
What I want,
that's sorry, David. That's DRPEAT,
right,
DRPEAT.com.
right, thanks, Lawrence, that's
Right.
it exactly. So what I'd like to talk about, it's based on reflection over the last 10 years about when you're looking at full system change, moving full systems from fairly traditional to 21st century learning, what are the key factors that will lead towards success? I'm reflecting on the last 10 years and upon the Rocky View School Division. I was really privileged at the time to work under a very innovative superintendent whose name was Greg Bass, who then became the Deputy Minister of Education, which was a wonderful thing for our system. It was a system that was looking at innovation, and it moved from a traditional system to one that very much reflected what 21st century learning should look like. So I've been reflecting on why was it successful. So I've identified some factors that may be worth considering if you're looking at changing your systems or even parts of your systems. I think the first point is that the major impetus for the change came from the community. I think it's extremely important that you have full support of the community that you work and live in. So community voice is incredibly important. And what I mean by community voice is the parents, students, and other stakeholders who are involved in the educational system. What we did basically, we used a co-constructive method where we held large seminars with about 300 people, each one. So we gathered data from about 900 people in the geographic area. And the question was, what do you want your education system to look like in the future? What would you like your students to be prepared for if they were moving into the 21st century? And this was about 10 years ago. So it was already the 21st century, but we were still operating as if we weren't in the 21st century. So we gathered the data with systematically asking questions, separating people into groups, and circulating around a gymnasium where the data was collected immediately and was summarized for them before they left the session. Afterwards, we spent many days looking at a huge amount of qualitative data and summarizing it into what the community felt that 21st century education should look like, what they wanted in terms of how they could prepare their students for the future. Based on that, we generated a vision, clear goals for student education. Now that vision was summarized down to a vision statement for all staff, not just the teachers, but everyone in the school division, which is a conglomeration of schools and thousands of students. All people knew what the vision was, from the bus drivers, the janitors, the teaching assistants, the teachers. all administration, we could all communicate what the vision was when it was articulated clearly. There was another factor that when I reflect upon was really important, and I was very skeptical about this one at the beginning. That was the use of media and a media specialist. A full-time media specialist was hired. That specialist could generate clear, easily understood communication. She was proactive. Rather than the press coming to us when they heard there was something wrong with the school division or there was an issue, she was proactive, sending press releases to them, having the full community know transparently what we were doing. She also was the single person to communicate with the media, and I'm talking all forms of media, newspapers, press, and our websites. The easily understood communication was really summarized down to what kind of instruction do we want for our students. Over time, it became very, very simple. What we want for our students is real instruction, real meaning it relates to them. It applies to their life. It's for everyone, those who are disabled, those who are intellectually able. So all our focus was on making lessons, making instruction real for everyone and visible. That was 10 years ago. Now, if you go to the website, it's developed farther than that. Their motto now is their students are innovators by design. So you can see the development. Why was it successful? Teachers needed a great deal of professional development. Very experienced teachers, some were excellent instructors, but they were still at the place where their main goal was to present content, not to look at students as the recipients, the main goal being instruction of students. So what we had to do now, the vision was well established. We had to increase the professional development, have the full school board or the parent council, I think it's called in UK, to be aligned with the vision. So we doubled the professional development days for the teachers. We set up communities of practice for every subject straight across the school division. Staff evaluation had to be aligned. Everything had to be aligned with the vision. Staff evaluation was aligned with the vision, but not just the staff of teachers, the evaluation of everyone, including the superintendents, the directors of learning. They all had portfolios and interviews that they had to go through to show that they were aligned with the vision of the school division. We had to ensure that our practices, as much as possible, modeled what we wanted to see in the classroom. In other words, our practices at the school division level, at the school level, and the classroom level all modeled 21st century learning. We had to develop a school division website. We had to develop communications, Moodle courses at that time, where courses and information was placed on the Moodle for the students. The use of apps for communication between the school and home. We also had to reinforce this systematically. This was done through monthly presentations by students to the school board so they could describe the projects they were involved in. We had student fairs where the students showed their adept use of some of the 21st century technology in their learning. In other words, the big concept here is system alignment. The other thing we had to do is cut out all the peripherals. We know what our vision is, we know what our goal is. All professional development focuses on that and that only for a sustained period of time. We committed to 5 years in this direction. So the teachers knew we weren't following the flavor of the month or the big name person coming to our school division to do a one-day seminar. Everything was in one direction in the entire system. So it's a really important principle that the entire system at all levels be aligned with the vision and the goals. We looked at, we want change based upon the community voice and the vision, but we need to sustain the change. We need the supports in place. So there are a few things we did, I think, that were very successful. Over time, those teachers who became extremely adept at using 21st century technology, we made them the school expert. And when there was a question, it was on the job training. A teacher could contact them. They would go to their classroom and show them what to do. We tried to remove all the barriers. There are many barriers to change because systems are made to be sustained in their current state, not to change. So what we did in the initials, at the initial stages, we made sure that every teacher got a laptop provided by the school division. We opened, in this case, it's not an advertisement, but they were tremendous support. We opened a Mac store. It was the only school division in North America at that time that had its own store. So we added, every teacher got a Macintosh laptop. We made it mandatory that all students by a certain date, as in the beginning of the following school year, had to bring a mobile device to school. The thought was, and it was very powerful, that students are learning more outside of school right now than they're learning in school because of their devices, because of their access to information, because of their use of these devices for communication amongst themselves. So we made it mandatory that they bring the mobile devices. But we also changed policy. They brought the mobile devices, but before they were allowed to use them, they had to take a media literacy course. There had to be parameters set as to how they would be used in classrooms. The other thing we did, and I think this is really important, we removed the focus point of the teachers on standardized tests. Like most school divisions or school areas, they had standardized tests provided by the governments. What we told them explicitly and clearly is forget about the standardized tests. What we're going to do is the students will still write them, but your focus will be on 21st century instruction for the students. Now, I can tell you a slight story here. I talked to the superintendent. I was the director of learning, in other words, directing this project under one superintendent. I said to him, you know, the literature says that it takes 5 years to make these changes. Well, I warned him that the school board is expecting changes very, very quickly in a year and a half. They want our standardized assessments to change. I don't know if it's going to happen because the literature says it'll take longer than that. But you know what happened? In 1 year, they would be considered red or yellow bars because it comes out in visual form. They all changed to green, straight across the board. So by allowing the teachers to be innovative, to use 21st century technology in their instruction with the students' performance was raised straight across the board. And what I learned myself was that you can have a vision for what is possible in a school division. And if you allow the teachers to be innovative, you give them the support that they require, they will do much more than you could envision. And the students will come up to they will also achieve much more than you could possibly imagine. So that's sort of a reflection on what happened in that school division. And looking at it over 10 years, it is still a school division that is far ahead of many in its innovation, in its mode of instruction, in the way that students are able to achieve learning the curriculum, which is part of what teachers do, of course. So that was quite a ramble there, Lawrence. That's probably my reflections just off the top of my head there as what are the key factors in facilitating full system change. So I hope that's somewhat what you're looking for, and maybe there can be some nuggets that listeners can take from that.
Well, I was interested in the Rocky Valley because Karen had alluded to it about 10 days ago, 2 weeks ago in one of the posts, and I was very interested in what was going on there. You were talking about, I mean, I've done this, huge change, and the barriers are what stop you. Top-down
Yeah.
barriers, horizontal barriers, or both. You can have top-down barriers and horizontal barriers amongst the staff. I had a, I was the chairman of the local school parents board, and they asked me to go and get more stakeholders here a couple of years ago in England. And I knew that we could do it one way. And I suggested what we did. We had an open day, and all the staff would come and show the best work in the local church. And it would be an amazing spring day. And the teachers said, no. They said, no, I'm not doing it. Simple as that. I was a bit shocked by that actually, because I've worked overseas for so long, yeah, with teachers from other countries. They would have been far more amenable. But that was one thing that stopped us. And when I've done huge change management before, within an education and a corporate field, it's the change mentors and the change mentorship that you
Yeah.
need to get on board. And that can be time consuming and exhausting.
Yes.
How did you, across an entire territory, get around that problem so quickly? Because all of your teachers, all of your admin, everybody had to be on board with this. What
Well,
was
I
the carrot for that?
now when I say everyone, there were also always teachers who didn't like the change. But we also know that the way you are evaluated determines the way you behave.
Yeah.
So the evaluation of teachers moved directly into their ability to be adept at using
Hmm.
21st century technology to
Okay.
support instruction, not as instruction, to support instruction. That's one thing. The other thing was putting that person right on site so that if they had questions, because technology is not easy. I mean, even now, after using technology for 10 years, we have to prepare for the Zoom meeting to make sure everything's working, and sometimes it doesn't.
Yeah.
So they could call the experts straight to their classroom to help them at that point. The funny thing is, what we found is often they would just ask their students, and the students would tell them what to do. I
Well,
mean,
yeah.
that
Yeah.
was the common thing that they found out. But removing those barriers, I think probably a big one was because the goals were set by the community.
Ah,
So it was the community voice, the parents' voice that was the impetus. It wasn't the government telling us what to do, or even the school division. It was, we've had these sessions. This is what our community says we must do. Are we going to do it or not? And actually, we aligned our goals with the government, not the other way around. We subsumed their goals into ours as compared to just following what the Ministry of Education said. I think another barrier is just allowing the teachers to be innovative, to giving them that freedom, and also modeling, like as in by the student fairs and the presentations at the boardroom, the videos that were presented. Um, Part of the professional development was also teaching teachers through professional development how you gather artifacts for assessment of students. But those artifacts also demonstrated the use of 21st century technology to support learning and the sharing of all that information in the communities of practice. Because one thing we did mandate is that every teacher had to be involved in a community of practice. And those communities of practice were cumulative, as in what took place, say, in September. There were assignments that were meant to be done by the time the next community of practice came. Then they ran themselves after that because they saw their own, they saw the utility of having a community of
yeah.
practice.
Yeah.
So it is removing the barriers, finding out what they are and removing them if possible. If not, like as in one barrier, standardizing tests, we didn't remove it. We just said, forget about them. Don't focus on them. You have to write them anyway. So write them. But what we found is our students' performance went way up because the teachers were not any longer teaching to the test, which is a terrible form of instruction. They were teaching the content to the students using the technology to support that learning.
But
Big
they were
difference.
also grading formulatively. So there was formative grading going on, by the teacher.
Continuous formative grading going on was part of the professional development, making every lesson real
Yeah.
for everyone and with thinking visible. So metacognition, in other words. So
So
all these factors
how did
working
you
together.
assure objective grading, fair and equitable grading, as opposed to qualitative local grading?
Okay, this, I don't know if you'll like this answer,
Go on then.
because I mean, I'm talking as an educational psychologist who has developed national assessments for countries.
Yeah.
Any way you look at assessment at the school level, it is subjective. It is.
Yeah.
So the focus of assessment should be not on evaluation, but on improving teaching and learning. So assessment should be focused upon how are these students learning? Is learning visible to them? How can they improve their learning? So formative assessment that's continuous and ongoing to improve learning and teaching. That will in turn improve, if you have to engage in standardized tests, it will improve performance on standardized measures.
Yeah.
We've shown that even with the most rigorous standardized measures as in intelligence tests. If you engage in metacognitive instruction with formative assessments over time, the actual performance on intellectual assessments will rise.
Yeah.
So that's the answer. Whether you agree with it or not, I'm not sure.
No, I agree. I do. I think it's not an answer I would or not agree with. It's just a logical outcome. It just has to work that way.
Yeah.
And there's really, if young people know they're being formatively graded and that's heading towards a final grade, there's a lack of anxiety and a lack of procrastination. They feel a bit more engaged as they're moving along because they're getting feedback on a regular basis.
Right. And there's
Fantastic
rubrics at the
feedback.
very beginning, so they know how they're going to be assessed
Yeah.
as well. So it's all those practices moving into the classroom to support learning and teaching, not to support performance on standardized tests. There's a big
Yeah.
difference.
How did you, you said you were going on and you looked at the way the students were advancing and you'd moved from red up to green because it was a visual. What were the KPIs for that? How were the performance measures done?
They were standardized measures that were province-wide,
Oh, okay. All right.
that all students had to take. I think it was grade 3, 9, and 12.
Yeah, yeah,
So standardized measures, that would be like most standardized measures in school divisions based upon the intended learning outcomes of the curriculum.
But you could still use the original targets and performance measures that were built around the final year assessment for the formative?
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, we didn't change the system of the standardized assessment. It's mandated.
Yeah.
So that wasn't changed. What changed was the instruction that took place in the classrooms.
I can see that happening across England, and we have double the population of Canada in a
Yeah.
tiny area. But I can see that happening this year, up until the exams in July, June and July, because they've been cancelled again, and it looks as though they've been cancelled for next year. And I heard on the BBC this evening, it may affect this generation for 10 years.
Yeah.
So there may be a 10-year hiccup because of this now. What amazes me, and I have to say it again, is that a government department that's responsible for millions of young children every day between the ages of 4 and 18 didn't have a plan B for a calamity.
Yeah.
Where's the scenario planning? Where's the health and safety? If they can't either, I'll go on a rant if I don't shut up. It just defies belief, David. As a health and safety auditor and a quality assurance assessor, why was there no plan B? It just gobsmackingly unprofessional. Actually, it's abusive.
Amazing, actually, but it's the same all over the world. In Canada, huge difference in what's happened in right down to various classrooms and school divisions, because there were some teachers who were using formative assessment. They already were using the tools of the culture, 21st century tools to support their learning. Now, when the COVID struck, those teachers continued to do so.
Yeah.
The teachers who were direct deliverers of content, not teaching students, they've continued that as well. I mean, I heard a broadcast just yesterday on the CBC of this poor university student sitting in India. The class starts at 1 a.m. Now, that immediately struck me. Why is this professor not using asynchronous methods, posting videos, putting up on Moodle the various assignments, and answering the people in their time zones?
Yeah.
But he's obviously lecturing. Everyone must attend at the same time, just like he did, or she,
Yeah.
when he was teaching these 350 people classes in university. Appalling form of instruction.
Yeah.
We know how to instruct, we don't do it. So
My
I
mum had to do that 40 years ago with the Open University on the radio and the television, getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
there.
But that was 40 years ago.
Yeah, exactly. We know a lot more than we did 40 years ago, but
Yeah.
we have 100 years of research knowing how to teach, but we don't often do what we know.
And the way that the data was collected is interesting. So basically, you had parent evenings, stakeholder evenings, come into a big hall,
Yeah,
600 at a time or 150 at a time.
yeah.
And then they would go around and talk to people who would then be inputting into the computer. And the questions that the stakeholders were being asked, they weren't leading questions, they were open questions.
Open questions, but I mean, leading to a point, but open.
Yeah,
Such
I understand. Yeah.
a question such as, I mean, I can't remember exactly, but questions such as, what would you like your students' education to look like for the next 10 years, your child's education? What skills do you think students need to have to function well in the 21st century? Those kind of questions, a different question at each table group, and then they would circulate. And actually what happened is the first group would obviously do the most work. The next group would read those responses and add to them. So the first group was longer than the others. Then there'd be a rotation to each table. With the input being added, a Wordle was generated to give them a summary at the end. And then within a day or two, a summary was sent out to all the participants. But all that data was then summarized. That took a long time. That took about a month before then there was the, how do you take this huge amount of data and move it down to a clear vision? So there was discussion about what the vision should be. Then right down to a motto that everyone could understand. So that's part of the clear communication. So a janitor could say, this is what our school division is saying. A bus driver could say, this is what we're doing. And the media specialist was very much involved in this whole thing.
That's very clever. And there must have been an immense amount of hard work gone into that. I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
David, thank you so much for your time.
Oh, you're welcome. It's wonderful to talk to you and reacquaint after a few years.
Yeah, a few years. I dare say when we post this up, we'll get quite a few responses for you to reply to, if you don't mind.
Sure, that would be great. And don't put this in the recording, but if you could send it to me as well, I'll post it on my website as well.
All right, will do. All right, I'll speak to you in a while. Thanks very much indeed.
Thank you.
I'll stop recording now.